calling this meeting of the Manchester by the Sea Select Board to order. Jeff?
Here.
Brian?
Here.
Dan is here, John?
Is here.
Okay, we will leave, we will enter into executive session. And ordinarily I have a nice piece of paper. Oh, okay.
So you should read the,
Yes, I've got it on the agenda.
Yep.
Executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares, which I do. So I move to enter executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Brian moved, Jeff seconded. Jeff,
Yes.
Brian, Ann says yes, and John.
Yes.
Okay. Shall we close the door?
I've got, so take this.
End of November, whatever that was. So right now, I think that they are going out to bid in terms of a manufacturer for them. It will take about a month to 6 weeks or so. They're expected to be installed, I would Chuck thinks probably sometime in February at the latest. The ones that involved the Historic District Commission was a sign at the end of School Street, a sign at the end of Pine Street, 2 parking signs next to Seaside, one on Church Street that says parking is behind this building. And a 3rd sign that is by Seaside one that really gives some information about bathrooms and the town hall. They were all approved. The key thing I think that we did agree to is that the 2 parking signs that indicate there is parking behind the town hall will be, there are already parking signs there that are mounted on stop signs or street signs or something. Those signs will be taken down and the parking signs, which are in the appropriate motif that they have designed, will replace them. We're not going to put up another post with that sign. We're just going to replace wherever they are. It'll be a nice looking piece.
But can we then maybe just change the date, Greg, to February or whatever the expected?
Yes, I think
Next update.
Okay.
but
awesome.
February is a
And
good one.
My second question was on the FY26 budget item. We're going to be discussing that at our next meeting. I presume that's where we get the big thick book.
Yes,
Okay. When were you planning to give us the big thick book? Because I would like, I think we want the opportunity to review it before the meeting.
Sure.
And
right, so the week before,
so can we be assured of getting it by the Thursday before at least?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, at the latest.
Okay, great. That was it.
Okay, the first item on our agenda is a tax classification hearing. And I am sure I have some.
I move that the select board open the tax classification hearing.
Okay, declare that one to Jeff. As a second. Jeff,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Ann says yes, John,
Yes.
okay.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Bransforty, and I'm the principal assessor for the town of Manchester. Tonight's classification hearing is part of our tax setting process that we conduct annually. We will not be asked to vote on a tax rate tonight, but we are going to present 4 items that will require a vote. And I'm going to explain the fiscal effects of each one. Some salient facts about fiscal 25. Every 5 years, the Department of Revenue recertifies the town's values and audits the work of the assessors department. Our next revaluation, recertification year is fiscal 26, so next year. This year was an interim year. The new growth remained the same on all levels, single family, commercial, personal property. The new growth, and these are items that were not assessed previously. These are new items, single family constructions or multifamily decks, additions, porches, anything that wasn't there before, and it's there now. So the new growth this year came in at $238,941. And for fiscal '24, that value was about $6,000 under that at $232,029. The total taxable value for fiscal '25 is $3,622,773,643. Out of this, 94.1% of this total value is residential, and we don't have any open space here in Manchester. And the balance of 5.9% is commercial, industrial, and personal property. Very similar to last year's percentages, which were 94% for residential and 6% respectively. The tax levy this year is showing an unused levy limit, excess levy capacity of $772,832.16. And the tax rate is the tax levy divided by the town's taxable valuation. A residential factor is adopted by a community, and it governs the percentage of the tax levy that is to be paid by the residential property owners. A residential factor of 1 will result in the taxation of all property at the same rate, which is a uniform tax rate. However, the law allows the commercial, industrial, personal property tax rate for the town of Manchester to be as high as 50% above the uniform tax rate, and the residential open space to be as low as 65% of the uniform rate. Historically, the town of Manchester has maintained a single rate. Shifting the tax onto commercial, industrial, and personal properties would create a tax burden for those properties, while the residential properties would only benefit from a small saving. So that will be one vote that we will need. Do you want to keep a single tax rate, or would you like to shift? And we're going to have a presentation a little bit later on. The residential exemption is the select board may adopt an exemption of up to 35% to shift the tax burden within the residential class from owners of moderately valued residential properties that are the principal or the domicile of a taxpayer. This is not an actual exemption, but it's a shift of residential taxes to non-owner occupied properties. Since most residential property owners in this community consider Manchester to be their principal residence, adoption of the residential exemption would only serve to increase the residential tax rate while providing a tax increase to all Manchester residential property owners. And to those assessed over the average residential value of $1,572,262. The small commercial exemption is very similar to the residential exemption. This exemption is beneficial to communities with a high presence of large commercial properties. It shifts the burden within the commercial class from small businesses valued under $1 million with an annual average of 10 or less employees during the previous calendar year to larger ones, and to parcels in the industrial class. In order for commercial parcel to qualify, every business occupying the parcel must also qualify for the exemption. So since most businesses in Manchester by the Sea are small, we would not see a relief in taxes. We would see an additional burden to larger commercial and industrial properties. The exemption goes to the building owner, not to the business owner. Therefore, depending on lease agreements, a small business owner may or may not benefit. Open space discount. The town currently has no land classified as open space, but if it did, the select board could grant such an exemption percentage of up to 25% as decided by a vote of the select board. Adopting an open space discount lowers the open space tax rate because the amount of the levy paid by the class is reduced. Those taxes are shifted to the residential class alone, which means a higher residential tax rate. Historically, Manchester by the Sea has retained a uniform tax rate with a residential factor of 1. Select board members, we ask that you vote on a minimal residential factor and the residential exemption, small commercial exemption, and open space discount at the end of the presentation. I've included some information, fiscal 24 versus fiscal 25 in the taxable value, difference in the tax rate, which is still pending approval from the Department of Revenue, average single family, and other details as a comparison to the 2 years. So now for the next set of this presentation, we have some spreadsheets showing allocation of the levy. So on page 9, you'll see 2 pie charts. One is for the value and the other one is for the tax levy. This shows you that the residential class takes up 94.133% of the overall levy. And commercial is 3.4558%. Industrial is very small at 0.1774%, and personal property is 2.334%. The next page, this is page number 10, shows a shift scenario. If we were to shift the rate initially estimated at $9.15 as a uniform tax rate, if we were to shift 10% onto commercial, it would lower the tax rate to $9.09, and it would increase the commercial, industrial, and personal property rate to $10.06. The highest percent we could increase would be 50%, which would lower the residential tax rate to $8.86, and it would increase the commercial, industrial, and personal property rate to $13.72. There's a bar graph on the bottom which shows as the shift decreases in residential, it increases in commercial. Where you can really see the shift is if you go to the next page, which is page 11. And you
Sure.
can,
I don't think we have those
Don't have that in our
grids.
package.
We don't have those grids.
you don't have these grids?
No.
That's
Okay, so
okay,
I'll have to,
just the pie chart, and after the
Pie
pie
chart.
chart.
Oh, that's all I had was the pie chart. I didn't see the grids.
yeah, they're in the second attachment. That was the
Oh.
grid. Well, I'll explain. So-
You have it?
Of the projected revenue.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Is there any way that could be sent to Greg and Greg could put it?
I think he has it. He got it sent to him. But I can, no,
From
that's,
Michelle.
no, that's the pie chart.
Yeah, but it's got all these different
Oh, yes. That's
worksheets on the
okay.
bottom.
Yeah, it was all different worksheets. So, okay. I can forward this to Greg. You have that, but I'm gonna forward to you right now. I apologize.
I just think it would be useful for us. to be
Yep.
able to look at this. Somehow rattling off a whole list of numbers.
Yeah.
Do you want me to make copies?
Did it come? No, not yet.
I think it was. It doesn't come through. But it-
Did it come? Okay, finally.
The presentation of the projected revenue. Is it in the spreadsheet?
So
Yeah.
at the bottom.
So in
you
the
can
bottom is the
see all
tabs.
The different tabs.
And you want to go to the
Page
shift
11,
scenario,
so Shift scenario.
in fact,
Page
or
11.
the first one
Yeah,
or the
I think-
second one?
Should be this. Second one.
Okay.
So
And if we scroll down on that, do we get to the bar?
the bar graphs are on the previous page, on the previous spreadsheet.
Oh.
Greg, do you want to go to the next? Yeah. And then scroll down to the bar graph, please. Here we go. So
And so-
that's the impact if we shift the rate. So this is the first bar graph on the left is the decrease as we're decreasing the burden from residential
Mhm.
burden onto commercial. On the bar graph on the right-hand side. There you go.
So you,
As you're lowering the tax rate,
Yeah.
you're increasing the commercial.
What's the order of the type of property? What does it go? Residential, open
So
space or
this is-
residential, commercial?
This is residential,
Yeah,
and this is the original tax rate, $9.15, and you're lowering it. So if you're lowering it 10%,
but the color of the bars are,
that's the decrease.
just all-
in
that's
the
decrease.
residential
Oh, that's,
tax
okay,
rate.
all right, that's residential grid.
915 to 909, 904, 892, and 886. As we lower this tax rate, we're increasing commercial from 915 to 1006, 1098, 1281, and 1372.
Okay, all right.
And because the commercial, industrial, and personal property portion is so small, that burden is very high. So now we go to the next spreadsheet, the second shift scenario. And if we lower the residential average value, 1.572262, if we lower that by 10%, that tax rate becomes $9.09. And it yields a saving to the average residential parcel of $94.34. The maximum that you can shift is 50%. So that would yield a saving of $455.96. However, that shift has to go on to CIP, commercial, industrial, personal property. So a 10% burden would actually increase the average commercial property value tax amount by $1,151.71. And if we were to,
versus a saving of $94.
no, it would be, yes, well, if you were to reduce residential by $94, you would increase commercial by
But it
$1,151.
says similar property.
The average
Oh, no, no,
residential
this isn't
value
similar
is
property. This is
one
just per
1.72
thousand.
million, yeah,
So you're basically allowing residents to, on average, to pay $94 less. And then on average, your commercial property would
Pay
pay
$1,000.
$1,100 more.
right.
So that's the problem, right? You just
Right.
have, you
So
have
the
such a small
maximum-
base to shift to.
Maximum amount you could shift is 50%, which would be a saving of $455.96 to the average residential property. but it would increase commercial by $5,783.87.
Right, so you look at, again, on the chart here, you just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the
Can you
bottom.
scroll down?
Right.
No,
Okay,
For that one, sorry.
I got it.
No, I don't have a bar graph for that one.
that's fine.
I just have dollar amounts.
Okay, great.
So the next item is the residential exemption. And so we established the average residential value is $1,572, $1,572,262. We have 2,169 parcels. So with a 35% residential exemption, it would give us a reduction of $550,292. Because we have 1,600 residential, single family in town, essentially, each one of these properties could qualify for an exemption, which would yield a higher residential tax rate. This type of exemption really applies to a community with a lot of second homes, summer residents, large amounts of apartment buildings which are not owner occupied. And some examples are Barnstable, Boston, Cambridge, Chelsea, Nantucket. Here in Manchester, most residential homes are owner occupied, so giving almost everyone an exemption would not be a feasible thing to do. The small commercial exemption is very similar to the residential exemption because it increases the commercial tax rate. So if you receive an exemption, it would give a reduction in tax amount, but the burden would actually be placed on the larger commercial and industrial properties. This analysis that I did for this particular exemption was done based on the average commercial industrial value. Only an estimated 25 out of 151 businesses listed from the state would benefit from this exemption, while the rest would carry the additional tax burden. Historically, Manchester has not adopted this exemption. So this would be beneficial in a community with a lot of large commercial entities that could take on that extra burden. And the last option that we need to vote on for tonight is the open space discount. We do not currently have any property classified as open space. This is not applicable. But if we did classify land as open space, it could be granted an exemption percentage voted on by the select board each year, not to exceed 25%, thus shifting that tax burden onto the rest of the residential properties in town. Adopting an open space discount lowers the open space tax rate because the amount of the levy paid by the class is reduced. Those taxes are shifted to the residential class alone, which means the residential tax rate would increase.
I'm sorry. Seems to me you've got a lot of open space. What?
it's not, it's not fine. It's not restricted to open space only.
It
And
doesn't
private hands.
include conservation land or
Ah,
chapter
okay.
land.
That's
or
all
rec-
excluded from this.
That's all
Correct.
excluded, yeah.
And
It's already taxed.
town-owned land is obviously, yeah. So this would be privately owned land that was classified as open space.
But typically would be put in chapter 61, 60, 61, whatever.
That's actually not included in open space.
Oh, it isn't,
This
okay.
is, so this is
That's
land
excluded
that would be
also.
voted on by the select board for a discount of up to 25% per,
Is it
In
something-
unrestricted land, basically.
is it something that say, the golf course could apply for?
Do you have an example of something that another town has classified as open space?
Beverly has open space, but I don't have a specific parcel. I could do some research and send that to you.
This, has no bearing on what we're currently doing, but it would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I'm just out of
Give
curiosity,
you some
what
examples of what it does. and-
it does and why
So
communities
Nothing
do
in the
it.
LCD.
it tries to encourage people to keep it as open space without putting restrictions on it.
So we have plenty
It
of open
lowers,
space, so we don't necessarily need to encourage further open space.
most of our open space is restricted. actually. I don't know if I should say that, but a lot of our open space is already restricted.
We've done our fair share. Okay,
So this gives someone who owns open space a tax break.
okay, to keep it.
All the other property owners will have to pick up that extra burden.
Mhm.
Right.
So
In
that's
order to
that's the
keep this-
trade-off.
And we have zero.
The residential exemption applies only to non-owner occupied? Okay, so we couldn't just decide that everybody who's got an above average house should pay a little bit more? Okay,
No. Unfortunately not.
well, that's like we're.
Unfortunately not, yeah. That's where you're sitting.
They already pay more, so.
They do.
Yeah, but
Pay their fair share.
Had a question, so, I mean, historically, everything's been one classification. What towns have enough commercial? When do you get enough commercial to say, okay, let's have two categories? 30%,
When I
20%?
was in Saugus.
Saugus,
for example,
good,
They have actually 18%
18%,
commercial. And so, however, the commercial base was a lot of large businesses. So you had the Square One Mall.
Yeah.
You had Walmart.
Yeah.
You have Home Depot, you have Lowe's,
Route 1.
Route One,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Route One. And so the question came up, what about CST technology? When that's complete, can we use that as part of the commercial stock to shift the rate? And the answer is, we'll have to see what the value is and what percent of the levy. But you do have to keep in mind that as you're shifting that burden, you're shifting it on all
Everybody.
commercial.
Right.
From the small 40 Beach Street
Mhm.
commercial condo to CST technology. So that remains to be seen.
But you said Saugus had two rates
Yes,
at 18%. Okay, so
two rates, yep.
I think most large cities have two rates, I would think.
They do.
Yeah, well, I was curious,
Right,
Saugus, I wouldn't put
yeah.
in
Sure.
kind of category, but it's,
PVD,
Believe it or not,
Beverly, Gloucester.
Gloucester does.
Newburyport, with all of their commercial, have a single rate.
mhm, okay.
Are there-
So we have 4 votes that are needed.
I move that the select board close the evidentiary portion of the hearing.
Second,
John,
Yes,
Anne says yes,
yes,
Kathy says yes, Brian,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
looking for a motion?
I think we're looking for Jeff.
Yeah. Move that the select board set the residential tax rate at a factor of 1, resulting in a single tax rate for all properties.
Second.
John,
Yes,
Anne says yes, Kathy.
yes,
Brian.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
and then I move that the select board does not establish a residential exemption.
second,
John,
Yes,
Anne says yes, Kathy.
yes.
Yes.
Brian says yes, and Jeff.
Yes.
I move that the select board does not establish a small commercial exemption.
Second.
John.
yes,
Anne says yes, Kathy.
Yes,
Brian.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
I move that the select board does not establish an open space discount.
second,
Jeff,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kathy.
yes.
Anne says yes, John.
yes,
And I move that the board close the public hearing.
Second.
John.
yes.
Anne says yes,
Yes,
Kathy says yes, Brian says yes,
Yes.
and Jeff. Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Very
Thanks for the
sorry.
info.
Information on the open space with some specifics.
Great.
And
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The report was really well done. I mean, it was very easy to
Yeah, it
understand,
was.
so thank you very much for that.
Yep.
Yeah, very complete. Okay.
1,000 grounds, 1,000 grounds.
And there
Okay, the next item on our agenda is an open meeting complaint from Patrick Higgins dated November 5th. We need to acknowledge receipt of the complaint, review, and potentially respond. And
Yeah, take it away.
Yeah.
Good evening, folks. For those watching, Michelle Randazzo, KP Law Town Council. So this complaint that you have before you tonight is with respect to the board's October 7th, 2024 meeting. The complainant is an individual who no longer resides in Massachusetts, but does watch various communities, board and committee meetings online, looks at their agendas, looks at sort of meeting minutes that are available online, and identifies perceived or actual violations of the open meeting law. This is not new, it may be new in Manchester, but this is, we deal with this type of issue every day. For the most part, the complaint identifies very technical requirements of the open meeting law. I would say that in substance, you folks comply with the spirit, certainly, if not to the letter in every instance. Sometimes there's, differences of opinion between complainants and boards about whether they're compliance. What we've done, you have in your packet is a response that I've drafted based on our reviews of the meeting video, as well as all the information that's available online. So we basically are looking at what the complainant could see in terms of what he could access through internet. And there are 7 specific violations that are alleged. And I'm just gonna run through them very quickly, but defer to the draft response that I prepared, which I hope you folks have had a chance to review. An announcement at the beginning of the meeting by the chair that the meeting was recorded. I heard today when we started that Zoom announces that the meeting is being recorded, and there's a little tag up there that says this meeting is being recorded. But when we reviewed the video that was posted, that wasn't necessarily apparent. So from someone who's watching the meeting, perhaps after the meeting is over, that information wouldn't necessarily be apparent. The minutes for the meeting do not contain a list of the documents and exhibits used by the board at the meeting. Your meeting minutes do refer to the meeting packet, which is available online. But technically, the law says you're supposed to list the documents, and I'll suggest some ways that we may tweak the minutes to meet this requirement in the future. Whenever any member of a board participates remotely, all votes must be by roll call. You folks have done that even just because you've got a hybrid meeting going on here, you've done all your roll call votes. That's obvious that you did so in the October 7th meeting. But the minutes say unanimous by roll call. Unfortunately, the AG, the Attorney General's office, which is charged with enforcing the open meeting law, takes a very strict view and says it's got to say Round aye, Harrison aye, Bellotta aye, et cetera, in the meeting minutes itself. It seems somewhat redundant because your meeting minutes also list the members present and absent. And if it's unanimous by roll call, that information is all apparent. But that is something that the Attorney General has a long-standing interpretation required that everybody's names be listed with the yays and nays. At the start of a meeting, if any member or members are going to participate remotely, the chair is supposed to announce who's participating remotely. That is a requirement that started pre-pandemic when people weren't really using for visual video conferencing. It was mostly phone, right, for remote participation. Then the pandemic came and we all jumped in using Zoom, and along the way, some of the little technicalities kind of went by the wayside, just as we were getting used to operating in this new virtual environment. And so that is one thing that is technically required. It seems obvious, especially if you're watching remotely, and you've got it on Zoom or Teams or some other platform, you can certainly see the people in the room and the screen of the members who are participating remotely. But again, it is a technical requirement. The complaint questions some of the specificity of the agenda items, and we've addressed that in the draft. The general rule is you're supposed to put as much information as you possibly can so that the people know whether or not they should tune in and listen to what you're talking about. But there's also a practical perspective that your meeting agendas, if they're 20 pages long, nobody's gonna read them. So we're always trying to strike that balance between the level of detail and having something that people can read and follow and feel like they can understand. And so we've addressed in the draft response why we believe that the agenda items were sufficiently detailed. But it is always something we ask folks, especially that are preparing the agenda, to be mindful of in making sure that if you look at it from the perspective of someone who doesn't know town, isn't even a resident, but if they looked at an agenda, would they really reasonably understand what you were talking about? So one of the examples is from the October 7th meeting, village trick or treating hours. I think that's specific enough. If you're going to be talking about the trick or treating hours, it seems like that's sufficiently specific, but it is generally viewed from the eye of someone who is an outsider looking in. Is there enough here to let us know what the board will be talking about? And then the last item is the use of acronyms. There's a general disfavoring of using acronyms, although the Attorney General has recognized that some things are more readily understandable by an acronym than by spelling the whole thing out. And so one of the items on the agenda had talk about PFAS. And I couldn't even tell you what PFAS, the whatever that long-winded thing is. I think more people would actually understand PFAS on an agenda than they would if you spelled the whole thing out. And so the Attorney General has recognized that the very commonly understood acronyms will be okay. Although the purist in me says you're always safer to spell it out if it makes sense and you have the ability to do so, at least in the first instance, in your agenda and in your minutes. But so basically the draft response that we've prepared identifies all of the alleged open meeting laws that this complainant has identified, why we think they're either technically incorrect or that, yeah, we could have done a little better. Because we always, everyone's human, there's always room for improvement, and you can always find something wrong with something. Because there are so many technical requirements. And we did see a big shift with the pandemic and the switch over to hybrid meetings or purely remote meetings. So in the years as we've gotten past the pandemic, the Attorney General has asked folks to go back to sort of some more rigorous focus on what remote participation looks like, what those requirements are, and has frequently reminded folks, hey, we've got until March 31st of 2025, unless the law changes, to continue with a scenario where all the board could be removed, right? But as we get closer to March 31st, we wait and see if there's going to be any changes in the law. Maybe another further extension, but always good to sort of remind ourselves of what those technical requirements are. Announcement at the start of the meeting's being recorded so that people know that if they say anything, their stuff is being recorded. And I might also suggest putting it on the agenda. I've had a number of towns that will do that. If they're going to be recording every meeting, put it on the agenda as a belt and suspenders so that folks know. One would think it's inherent, one would see that it's being recorded. But I have one town where the select board sits here and the cable guy, I mean, not to be flip, but the cable guy is literally sitting right there with the equipment, right? So it is quite apparent that it's being recorded. And we still had a complaint. And we resolved that by doing everything. We put a sign on the front door saying this meeting is going to be recorded. We put it on the agenda, and it's just another way to inform folks of what's happening. But I do think in the, draft response, the only thing I would tweak would be to make a point about the Zoom recording. Because that was something, again, that wasn't apparent to us when we watched the video, but I can see here right now clearly that that's obvious for anybody that's attending the meeting, in real time. Did anybody have any questions about the draft response?
Good.
And I would also just make a note that as you folks know, and I've done several open meeting law trainings for you folks over the years. I don't know if Greg has had some separate ones, but you know, we do periodically do open meeting law trainings for staff and board and committee members to ensure that folks are up to date with the requirements. But we're seeing a lot of complaints that focus really on the technicalities of remote or hybrid meetings.
Interesting to hear that, yeah, we're not alone.
Oh, no.
That's
Oh, no.
my first reaction when I saw this. I don't think I've seen one before.
Yeah, I mean,
But you as a law firm see them
right, we
regularly.
regularly. And so that's why, you know, you'll see that in a number of places in this draft response, we have really tried to focus on that there isn't a lack of transparency. You know, there isn't, you know, you folks do more than some communities do by, for example, posting your meeting packet, right? A number of my communities don't post the open session meeting packet publicly. I encourage folks to do that when you can, because it's, again, it aids to transparency, it aids to responding to public records requests, and you can say, hey, look, our packet's there, you can see it, but there's just a few tweaks, I think, that we need to adopt moving forward, and we've identified those in the draft response.
All right. I move the select board authorize town council to send a proposed response to Patrick Higgins' open meeting law complaint dated November 5th, 2024, on behalf of the board.
Second.
Probably buy a Netflix subscription, is gonna start watching this stuff.
Maybe it should be a Hallmark movie.
Jeff,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
And it's yes, John.
Yes.
Okay,
I have a wife.
right. What can we expect?
6 months. So basically, let me explain the process. So this is the first step, right? We would send the response to Mr. Higgins. We actually address it to the Attorney General's office because, you know, we make a lot of legal arguments and that's really sort of the target. But it is after Mr. Higgins receives the response, he's copied on it. He then has to make a decision as to whether or not to move the complaint forward to the Attorney General's office. So even though they're copied on everything, they technically will say to Mr. Higgins or any complainant, okay, we've got this, you've got, I think it's 90 days, to decide whether or not you want to move the complaint to the quote unquote next level, which is Attorney General review. If they do receive a indication from him that he wants to move it forward, then they have all of our information, they have the draft response, they will make a determination. You know, my guess is that they would probably say, yeah, you need to do better on these things, and there's no violation on that. And from when he would pursue the complaint to the AG, I would say about 6 months. For a final determination.
Have you dealt with other complaints from him specifically, and does he follow up generally?
I would say yes. I would say yes. You know, this is an important thing for him.
Plus Netflix subscription.
Was that yes, you hear from him a lot, or yes, we're gonna hear from him again?
It could be
Or
both.
yes and yes?
It could be both. I mean, you know, we deal with very many complaints from Mr. Higgins. As does the Attorney General's office. I have had some towns that have had one, and that's it, right? I can't say to you that I have any statistics about whether or not once he's seen violations in a particular community, whether he continues to mine for additional violations. But I mean, he considers himself an open meeting law watchdog, and you know, he's identified issues in other communities that you know, good for bringing it to our attention so we can fix it moving forward. So,
The email address is at openmeetinglawenforcer.com. So I
Yeah.
suspect,
No, I
you know,
just trying to bring
Yeah.
this information out because someone may watch this sometime.
I mean, it is the truth, and I can't, it is absolutely anybody's right. They don't need to be a resident of Manchester to say, hey, look, I think your Board of Selectmen has done something that's not technically compliance with the open meeting law. The only way we do better is if we know that there's an issue, right? But, I don't have any reason to believe, nor does he allege that these were intentional violations. And my overall response is that you folks comply with the spirit of the law and even go beyond in your efforts to be transparent, that these are really merely technical violations for which he has not himself identified any harm or prejudice or, inability to access or understand what you folks were discussing. So.
I guess. Almost anyway. I think we should pass this response from and the complaint to the heads of other boards. I don't think it's necessary to put the whole town through open meeting law training immediately, but if there are places where, for example, making sure that your agenda is clear about what's going to be discussed and announcing that it's being recorded if it is being recorded and so on.
I think that's a great idea because every board varies. And, before the pandemic, it would have been at the select board would have to decide whether or not to allow other boards to have remote participation. That was one thing that sort of got taken away during the pandemic. Every board could decide for themselves, and that led to some sort of decentralization of the processes, if you will. And that's continued a bit. So, I have towns that have standard templates for all boards, right? For meeting agendas and meeting minutes. I have templates that I prepared. The Attorney General has checklists, which have been recently updated, that are also good guides. I do think it's a good idea to, try and standardize if you can, but, boards and committees and staff in particular are used to doing things particular ways with their minutes.
I'm hesitant to standardize meetings because people run meetings differently, but
Right.
Knowing where there are weak points, would, I think, help the heads of all of our boards. So.
With regard to complaints, do they mostly come in associated with select boards or can it be?
Any board.
Okay, so I mean, planning or zoning,
Zoning,
finance, they're all, okay, so I think Ann's point is well
And,
taken.
and that's the.
Okay, it's
that's
not
why I
just
think it is a good
a
idea.
focal
It's-
point on.
All of these
us.
points are things that apply uniformly to all public bodies.
Okay, all right, so everybody,
even the
never know.
committees, not just the elected boards.
Correct.
Right,
Yes.
so.
And
yeah, I
any
made a note-
multi-member body.
support.
Right,
that
so
is
I made a
covered by
note
the
that
law.
where I'm a liaison, I'll make sure they, get the email, whatever that you're gonna send out, and we talk about it. So I think we can all do
So
that.
I think there needs to be something that needs to, these board committee chairs need to know something.
But I think it's
What
something
about
that,
ad hoc committees? Do they still have to?
So ad hoc committees, if they're multi-member bodies that meet the definition of public body, which is they're convened within government for a public purpose and they have a specific charge and they have the ability to act on that charge, then yes, they are covered by the open meeting law. So they're covered by all of these rules that we're talking about. And that's where it really can be challenging because you get, people that either haven't been in government for a long
No.
time or are really in for a specific, like you said, with an ad hoc committee, they're here for a specific purpose with a specific charge. Maybe there's not a lot of staff resources available to them and everybody's just trying to do the best they can, right? Which is why the Attorney General generally has focused on education and not punitive, not fines or finding intentional violations unless it's the same board that does the same thing over and over again and gets called out on it and doesn't change their ways.
okay. Well, the end of. Any other questions? Okay, the next
See, thank you.
item on our agenda is to consider the approval of mooring and waterway regulations.
Do we need to make a motion on this on
I
Michelle's
think
letter?
we already,
Yes.
we did.
Okay, good.
We got that done and then we went back to the,
I can't remember.
On script.
Checking the script.
I was gonna say that Deb's done an outstanding job. this time.
Very helpful script.
Yep,
We flew right
It
through the
is.
tax stuff.
okay. Greg, do you want to?
Tee this off, tee this up. We're back before you with revised proposed revisions to the waterway regulations. Last spring, the HAC reviewed some potential changes. We discussed those changes in June, which was late in the season, as the season was already underway. And decided to temporarily allow for this past season, the commercial mooring holders to rent some of those moorings out seasonally. But indicated that you would be revisiting the issue this fall in preparation for next season to make a more definitive determination. So the HAC has done some additional work on the proposed language for the bylaws. There are other items that are being proposed to change, but I think the focal point has been on the commercial moorings. It was probably warrants the most attention on your part. So I will let either Brian or members of the HAC walk us through those changes. I don't, if you want to start with the moorings and then go back to the others, or take it page by page.
So I have it ready to share, or do you want to share? The rules, I was gonna put them up, so. everyone-
Are you logged in?
Yeah.
And I'll- log in as.
Well, I show as Manchester by the Sea one. Surprisingly.
Okay, that's you.
Yep.
Sure. We should be good to go. So, well, Brian's getting this up, in terms of moorings and who has the right to use a mooring. I think the most critical piece is that the assignment of moorings is handled by the harbor master's office. And no one else should be assigning moorings to individuals, and that assignment should be from a waiting list. We certainly have a fairly large waiting list, and that the harbor master should assign those moorings per chronological order on the waiting list. So that's a critical piece in moving forward. So with that preface, I'll move it over to the HAC numbers.
Just starting at the top. We'll just go down. Some of this is just cleaning up for writing.
Question on line 90. Do we now have 3 levels of harbor master?
Well, you have your head harbor master, you now have a deputy, you do have seasonal
Okay,
assistants, yes.
so there is not a harbor master and assistants. There,
This, where it says harbor master, duly appointed harbor master or assistant harbor master. I guess, in here, this is just, it looks like a blanket term.
okay, so if you're looking at it at some point, you might put in deputy harbor master, just,
I can make those changes right now. It's easy. Easy to do it, so duly appointed harbor master or, yeah.
Because there are some things that the deputy can do that, yeah, anyway.
Are there multiple people in some of these spots, like deputy harbor masters?
The assistants are all seasonal, part-time.
And there would be several of them.
Multiple
All right,
assistants.
put an S on the end of that.
Would they be making the decisions though about who gets the mooring?
No decisions,
No.
nor would
Um,
the deputy.
Okay,
So
but
that's what,
yeah,
Yeah.
that's, and the other place is when you're handing out, tie-ups at the floats, which is done by assistants, I think.
You mean repark?
Yeah.
transient? So that's done on a first come, first served basis for our daily visitors. For the overnight, it's first come, first served, whoever, makes the request,
Okay.
uh,
Through Dockwell.
through DocWalk. Any one of the staff, from myself down to
Yeah, it's
the
just,
young people working at the dock, can approve those.
I think, I don't remember where we get to it, but at some point it says that the harbor master, only the harbor master can approve for tie-ups. No,
Yeah,
okay,
we'll have to look. I don't.
okay. Yep.
Harbor Department, that would be easy
Yeah.
to change that to Harbor Department. So I've made this change, you should be able to see that here,
Mhm.
Harbor Master and School, appointed Harbor Master for deputy.
Uh, 367, 360, 370, that area.
Okay, before we get there, 341, some of the darts out here have lights on them. And the resident asked if the blue lights should be out there, because they're white lights and then seasonal only from the first to October 15th, and then the lights be turned off for the off season. So 367, town food light service provider.
In the interest of limiting the times we have to approve, the number of times we have to approve the regulations, could we perhaps change this to just say that the harbor master, meaning the senior harbor master, must approve mooring service providers rather than listing individual companies?
I think that's what he did with the line on 372, because we requested that the last time.
No,
Oh, sorry.
372 says may be serviced by the owner if qualified.
As determined by the harbor master?
Yeah, but that's by the owner.
That's the owner.
That's
No,
not-
okay, you're saying by.
By other
got it,
firms,
other, got it,
That,
okay.
that the harbor master can approve firms that can maintain moorings
Got it.
without
Okay.
having to come back to the select board and make a change to the regulations.
But we'll still leave the listings that are there.
No, I think that
I-
is that we take.
You're saying take them out?
I take them out,
See,
yeah.
because this is an informational thing that people say, well, who do I contact? At least. you
Then
can-
call the harbor master.
Well, they'll always do that.
Yeah.
It's overburdened them. I think people know.
No, well,
But, yeah, I think they're more likely to call the harbor master than they are to read 30 pages of, or
Mhm.
20
Right,
pages.
so, I mean, when they're issued the mooring at that time, would be a
That's a
good
question.
time to ask, how do I maintain this? And,
Yep.
so I think that makes sense.
Okay,
An acceptable change. On the screen.
Can't see it.
So
I can't see it.
We're gonna take
Zoom
your
that
word for it.
moorings must determine, I'm sorry, harbor master must determine qualified mooring service providers, so.
okay.
Yeah. Got that one?
Okay,
Probably say shall determine.
So,
Shall.
yeah, rolling, rolling.
9.
So back when the temp program first was introduced to the Harbor Advisory Committee, one of the members wanted there to be a premium for a person who received a temporary mooring for the season, on top of paying that what is our now $15 foot sum total to have a mooring in Manchester. This person urged that the person must pay another 50%. The Harbor Advisory Committee decided to request that we strike that section. That they would pay only the 15, not $22. Any questions about that? So we've had,
Go to 519,
Yeah,
which references is the same subject as 598, but different substance.
we've had a lot of, gosh, I guess a half a dozen incidences of people wanting to take over a mooring that was held by a cousin, uncle, brother, sister, aunt.
I think the discrepancy though is the spouse is not listed in the earlier definition on 519 through 521. I don't see the word spouse there.
Okay, we can't put that in there because the spouse is listed.
Right. So I think that just needs to be added to make it identical to the other reference.
Is there some way to avoid having the same definition in two places?
Yeah, that's even better.
Yep. Absolutely correct that. Getting married just to get us.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Probably
easy.
I thought just gonna.
I'm gonna watch this. It's going through my mind too.
All right, so here we are at the seasonal rental.
Right.
Read it, or I assume you have it.
We have it.
I have a question on this.
Yes,
Did you want to define seasonal rental as perhaps being more than 14 days, which seems to be transient, but less than a full season? I don't know if you have defined season, what a
No.
seasonal rental is, so that may be something to consider.
in the the definition section at the beginning.
Either in the definition, or we could do it here. I hate to interject something that the HAC hasn't looked at yet, but this was just something we noticed as we were preparing for today, that it may be beneficial to distinguish a seasonal, what a seasonal rental is.
Okay, do Brian, what do you mean by a seasonal?
Seasonal would be for an entire season. Beginning of a boating season when boats are launched to the end of the boating season when the boats are transient, according to regulations, 14 days. Mooring for 14 days in the harbor. Not the
Okay, there's also the definition that I found for commercial mooring.
you found,
There's a reference to commercial mooring. And I don't know what the definition of a commercial mooring is.
What line number you're looking
Well,
677.
at? Oh, I got it.
So-
677. Got it.
The heading to this is permitted boatyard moorings.
But-
Yes.
And then,
Yeah. But permitted boatyard moorings are, the service moorings.
well, they may be, so that's how they currently are defined, but this is suggesting that permitted boatyard moorings may be used as support moorings for vessels.
Support or seasonal.
So I think the question is it better to not use the term that's undefined and just use the phrase boatyard moorings and describe their,
Absolutely.
So there are boatyard moorings and they may be commercial moorings or service moorings. Is that what we're saying? Those are the two categories?
Transient as well. So commercial, should be transient, seasonal, or service.
And what is commercial? Again,
again, it sounds like a term that was just
yeah, what
casually
kind of,
introduced,
a-
which
what
may
about, what
cause
kind of a mooring
confusion,
is commercial?
which I think is the point.
So that really means a boatyard mooring.
Yeah.
So instead of the word commercial, insert boatyard mooring.
So is that eliminating one of these terms?
Yeah, eliminate commercial.
Oh, okay, fine, I agree
Eliminate
with that.
commercial.
All right.
That's a very good point, because
Commercial moorings also apply to fishing fleet.
Yes, that's 100% correct.
but it's a totally different animal.
Right.
Right, that doesn't get,
Does that-
That-
does
that's
that,
why I think the boatyard mooring is appropriate here.
Yeah, so this is under boatyard mooring heading, not commercial fishing, so probably I should go back and the fishing as well.
Well, I just don't want there to be the confusion that Mr. Crocker suggested that a commercial mooring was a lobsterman's mooring or a mooring rented by a boatyard.
Seasonal rent.
A seasonal rental.
So if we change all of commercial under the boatyard moorings heading from commercial to boatyard, that.
yes,
I think
Yes.
that'll help.
No,
okay. But boatyard moorings can be moorings that are used for service or that are being rented for the season,
Or that are being rented short.
or short, or for transits.
Those three uses.
Right. And it's possible that some service moorings could be transient at some point in time during the summer. Depending upon whether the workload is high or low, we can assume that.
Sure.
I would think.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I think I have eliminated all of the reference to the word commercial and changed them to boatyard.
When Greg introduced this, he said that one of the critical issues is that the moorings be assigned by the harbor master and not by the boatyard.
Well, from the list, right?
like who's making the
But
calls?
the harbor master introduces a candidate to the boatyard rather than the boatyard picks a name.
If the boatyard comes to me with a name and it's appropriate on the list, I think that they could certainly do this to.
I am
Where they are.
not sure
Well, if
that,
I'm managing the list,
yes,
right, if I manage the list. And I say, okay, you can ask this person, okay, you can ask this person,
It's like your life.
exactly, if they bring forward a name, I look at the list and it's appropriate. That should, it's virtually the same thing. It's
It
me
is.
approving.
You just need some verification that it has started from the top and gone down.
Right.
That's,
Right, and
That's-
that's determined by, you know,
okay.
my.
Well, how do you know that he has asked everybody else on the
Because
way
I
down?
asked, and
You-
I
then-
can also, so
Why is it
Is it-
easier for you to ask everybody every time the yard comes up with a name, rather than you tell the yard who the next name is?
Oh, this is public.
I don't see the difference. If that's what you want me to do, I'll be happy to do it. I will be happy to do that.
The way I would look at it, Bion, is record keeping. It's much easier for us to verify that the people on the list have been appropriately contacted in the right sequence. If that process is initiated from a town, email, et cetera, rather than someone, coming to you and saying, hey, I contacted these 3 people and this 4th one on the list wants it. So I just think from a verification, from a compliance standpoint, it's easier to verify if it's initiated from the harbor master's office.
Just tell me how you want it done.
I'm just wondering if he's got a list of 400 people and he has to make 400 phone calls or even
Where's that
200
phone
phone
call?
calls.
Is it an email?
I mean, I know what you go through, or I have a feel for what you go through when you've got the move up list.
So what I was considering, John, though, was
Yeah.
like an email. Normally,
That's-
when you send out an email,
That's what
you
he's
can
got.
say, you have, 2 weeks to respond or whatever it is. We must hear back from you by this date, or, what is the turnaround?
I think the latter point is the way to go. You can't call or even contact one email after another. You've got to send out a blanket email to everybody there and say, there's this possibility coming up. Let me know if you're interested. But you've got to give some parameters about it's going to cost, people have to know so that maybe you hear back from
There has to
40
be
or
a
50,
time limit.
40 or
can't leave
50
it
people,
open-ended.
but
So here's
you
the
can't deal with
process works
yeah.
when a mooring becomes available. Somebody gives it up.
Yep.
I reach out. They have 14 days to respond. They say, oh, great, I'm so excited. How long do I have? 2 weeks later, I got an email, we're not ready. So I go to the next.
That's the
Then
whole.
they do the same thing, and it's a month. Some of these moorings take months to get reassigned, months. So a blanket email saying there are X moorings available. We're going from the top down, reach out to me. I get my responses in 7 days.
That's the way to do it.
Right.
And then you've got a prioritized list that may be only 30 people.
Right.
Or 20 people
Contact.
or less.
Right. I think from my perspective, they only care about is that the process is initiated from the harbor master's
No, I
office.
agree,
That's-
but that's the way to.
How you
to
do it in the most efficient manner is up to you.
We've got that, we've changed commercial to boatyard.
Okay.
So, couple of questions. So are you gonna know at the start of the season how many moorings are gonna be available?
I assume so. I'm in regular contact and the odds will let me know if they're going to participate or not. And let me know how many
'Cause
moorings they have.
I mean, the boatyards have a certain number of moorings. And some of them are service moorings. They're all kind of off that list. And the other ones are going to be available for boaters, and you need to know how many that is. And do the boatyards pay for all the moorings or just the service moorings, and these other moorings, they're not paying anything that's between?
So every mooring gets paid for, every single mooring.
Okay.
gets paid for. If it's a service transient mooring, then boatyards will pay.
Right,
If it's one that's been assigned for seasonal assignment, we're going to pay the town 15.
okay, so they're already, that was the key questions. They're already out that money. Okay, I just.
Yeah.
And I assume for all of them, there's an assumptive length of a boat, because you don't know what's going on with that. It's just,
Well, so the maximum length in the harbor is 45 feet. Anyone who gets a seasonal mooring has to provide me their registration, because that's what we base our fees from, the registered length. of the vessel.
okay, so they're not prepaying them.
The service moorings they are.
Yes, and there's an assumptive length on that, and that's the end of it.
Right,
Okay.
right. So
But for the other ones, they're not paying until you know who's on that.
it's been 40 feet since I've been. here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's not explained in here, and that is, I'm going through this, I'm wondering how that fits together. Now I see.
So the transient service ones are.
Assumptive numbers.
Right.
Um. The final sentence, at least in my copy, and I'm sorry, my eyes aren't that good. This assignment in no way confers permanent private assignment. I guess it's the second
Right.
one. I don't know what that means exactly, but it would be really inconvenient to have got one of these boatyard moorings 1 year and be arbitrarily denied it the next year.
Okay. If the board wants the, person on the wait list who's been assigned that spot to be able to have that year over year, I certainly have no idea of that. This line about the, permanent private is really addressing exactly, the sort of issue that happened in Harwich, where the town harbor master called someone and said, here's your mooring, this is your mooring. And they put their boat on the mooring, thought it was theirs, and then they received a bill from a boatyard. So these are not those. This is not you being chosen from the wait list for your mooring. This mooring belongs to the boatyard. It's the town.
No, the mooring doesn't belong to anyone. The mooring is let season by
Right.
season to someone.
Right. I agree 100%. That was
But-
not my intent for that statement.
The other problem that Harwich had was somebody was given a mooring and then denied it the next year because he didn't spend enough with the boatyard who was controlling the moorings. And that I don't want to see happen here.
His assumption was that that was his mooring, just like you have a mooring in this harbor. Just like Jeff has a mooring in this harbor. Okay, if I called you and said, you have a mooring, you're on the wait list, and I say, here's your mooring, your mooring. And then you get a bill from a boatyard saying you can't use this mooring unless you pay us. That's the problem. This is that language. I'm just trying to clarify that language, which wasn't clear to you. That's what this means. It's not a permanent private assignment. It apparently can be a permanent commercial or boatyard assignment, but it's not a permanent private assignment.
So
I'm
these
sure-
moorings are assigned year over year to the boatyards.
Yep.
Okay, and I think your question was, is that going to be a problem if somebody gets one of these seasonal rentals 1 year, but not the next year? I guess my perspective is, if I'm on the wait list and my boat is somewhere anyway, if I'm not, if I don't have a mooring, I'm doing something with it anyway. Personally, I'd love to be off the wait list for a year. And with the, as long as it's clarified that it is a seasonal and I don't get it next year,
It's very,
I would
Okay.
have to do the same thing with my boat the next year as that I'm doing now without the mooring, you know?
so I think I need to make clear, I have no problem.
Yeah.
If the select board wants to say to bind Pike on a wait list, if you want to rent one of these moorings from Manchester Marine. And, oh, by the way, you can keep renting it every year until your name comes up for your permanent private mooring. I have no issue with that.
Now,
But then then how is it assigned to the boatyard? I mean, I thought the reason for doing this was that sometimes these moorings are left underutilized. And we were trying to ensure that they get utilized in a fair way. If the boatyard year over year could just assign it to the same, you know, ensure that it's used by the same person. I mean, I guess I don't, why is the boatyard even involved? Yeah.
That wasn't, I
Okay.
didn't, this wasn't my argument.
Okay.
This was something that was presented.
Right, that's what
So,
I'm trying to
Well,
understand.
I think this is a letter you should be sending out every year. Okay, and say, who, you know, is interested in boatyard moorings.
Right.
To Ann's point, it may be, there are some people that get a mooring and they kind of look at this and said, maybe I can get it the year after year, but that's as long as somebody that's higher on the wait list doesn't have a boat this year or can't do it this year, but wants to do it the following year. He's gonna get that letter from you and say, yeah, I'm raising my hand. But to Ann's point, maybe people that are on those moorings have a right of first refusal. I mean, we're in uncharted territory for the next following year. We're in uncharted territory here. Somebody may sign up for this for a year and say, this isn't working for me.
I would be concerned about people jumping the wait list just because if a temporary mooring, a seasonal mooring could be offered. And, you know, so let's say I'm next on the list and I turn it down this one year. What happens if you turn down a mooring? Just if one becomes available, I'm next on the list and I turn it down, do I automatically go to the bottom of the
No, no.
list? No,
So
okay,
if you're on the wait list and I call you and I say, Kathy, you've got your mooring, you say, that's great, you don't have a boat, it's gonna be at least another year, I say, you go, we defer you. I'm not gonna call you again this year.
Right.
To tell you this morning, on January first, everything resets.
Right.
And you'll re-enter the queue in the same slot or potentially higher. Right?
Right.
Until you hit number one. I will share that in the temporary program, both in Kittery and here in Manchester, it tends to be the same people year after year after year who say, yeah, I take a temp. A lot of people have a situation elsewhere.
Right.
And if they give that up,
they don't want
they're
to.
likely to lose it. We all know what it's like in Massachusetts, trying to find a home for your boat. So to give it up for 1 year in Gloucester, Salem, Beverly, and Danvers to come to Manchester where you ultimately want to end up, and then not know if you have a home the next year. Most people don't. So it is consistently the same names year after year, calling me, asking me, hoping, do you have a temp this year? Do you have it? Which we never know. No more assignments.
So there could be the situation where somebody's on a boatyard mooring
Mhm.
and they're pretty high on the wait list and you call them in mid-July and say, I've got a mooring.
Mhm.
I assume you'll say, I'll treat this as a temp mooring. If you want this mooring, you're already paid in for this year, you'll stay where you are, but next year you can go on that mooring. You would work out some sort of an arrangement to,
Yeah, that seems fair. If they've made that capital layout.
yeah, you can't force them
You
to,
can't control when the moorings become available.
no, you can't.
Can't do it.
But I would think that you would make an arrangement and now I've got an empty mooring for a month and a half or 2 months. You'll find somebody.
You Put it in the temp program.
Right
Yeah.
now, we're kind of,
Okay,
we've got a fairly elaborate thing going on.
yeah, we do.
And it's not really reflected in the language.
So I think, so the HAC, so the original proposal was definitely a temporary year to year.
Yeah.
And I think at the last HAC meeting, there's a robust discussion on that and whether or not that is viable and if the boatyards were interested in that or not. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the HAC came down on deciding to take away calling it a temporary, and that it could be a permanent assignment,
Yeah.
so long as that person was in good standing
Mhm.
with their bill pay.
That's, yeah.
It's a right of first refusal kind of arrangement.
Yeah,
Year to year.
Which is what regular moorings are.
yes,
Doesn't that just turn it into a regular mooring? I guess.
Yeah. It-
Yeah.
it does.
It's just a regular mooring. So what's the purpose of this seasonal,
It's allowing the boatyards to
give up a mooring?
No,
what has happened is that they have gained a mooring because of the bow and
being
stern.
10 moorings.
Gained
Right.
10 moorings. And and interest in capitalizing that.
Which brings up another question, which I think I'm going to address, Michelle. What is your understanding of the position of the Inspector General in the state about the boatyard being able to charge for mooring?
I'm gonna say no, but I'll give you my caveat, which is, we've tried to get both with DEP and, even Army Corps of Engineers, we've tried to get an answer from them about what their position is. We can't get any answer back. And so when we look at the overall case law with respect to moorings and everything else, the very equitable, we don't, we think you can't charge a premium, except for additional services that might be provided by, the tender service and things like that. Those are above and beyond the actual, offshore mooring itself. Does that make sense? Because
Makes sense, but it kind of walks the whole thing back now. Right.
My question to the Inspector General, when I spoke with the Deputy Inspector General, I referenced specifically Salem Harbor. Salem Harbor has Hawthorne Cove Marina, which controls 270 moorings. When I worked there, they controlled 125. Barnegat Transportation controlled the other 100. So Safe Harbor has 270 moorings that they rent. Boaters pay the town fee, they pay whatever it is Safe Harbor wants them to pay. And the city of Salem advertises on their website that you can click on the link on the website and be taken to Safe Harbor to rent a mooring for the season. 270 moorings. And if you go online,
Can't find a place to put
you
boats.
find community after community after community that has commercial rental moorings, where the facility is allowed to charge their rate. So I only bring this up because Manchester is not singular.
But I'm curious, Fine, what did the IG say?
He said,
I mean, and I think that's the problem, is that, when we look at the different communities where the Inspector General has weighed in and, this question is not answered from any of the sources that we could find. Nobody will give us a straight answer on what their position is. And so, there is some risk to going further out.
Some of the communities that the IG's office has ruled on, they have gone to the harbor master maintaining it and assigning it. And a couple of those communities are allowing the boatyards to charge their own rates, and the IG has not intervened.
But won't specifically.
But won't answer the question.
Won't answer the question.
So reality though, those are much larger harbors and the city or town has effectively outsourced the management of a certain number of moorings to a private boatyard or marina, it sounds like. And then allowing that. I mean, that's what the arrangement, it seems like, unless the harbor
Yeah,
master in
I'd say
Salem.
some of the
is
harbors aren't larger, some of them are smaller than us, I believe.
Well, maybe the term larger, but it sounds like those communities have outsourced the responsibility for managing a certain number of moorings. If and I think it's clear that this select board does not want that for
Mhm.
our harbor, is what I'm hearing from the board.
Well. So for now, we could just go with what we have and then whatever comes up down the road, we'll just have to revisit it, right? I mean,
Well, what do we have?
System that seems to work.
Yeah,
Well-
basically.
Okay,
Um,
I don't think that's true. I think we have a system where the boatyard selects its own.
No, I mean, if we go have Bion
We
selected,
make these
like we're
adjustments.
talking about
Yeah,
here,
make these adjustments.
make these adjustments. And then see what happens.
Yeah, tweak it, we're not gonna get it right the first time anyway.
right now I mean, in the last few years, there are a number of moorings that now have floats.
Mhm.
Which in effect is the same as Manchester Marine is. These floats, you got nothing to do with them, other than saying you can put one here, you're managing the location. But the float is the responsibility of the mooring holder, correct?
The two mooring holders, so the way. it
Uh,
works
Okay, all right.
for- Right, so for the recreational boaters, you're gonna partner with an existing mooring. An existing mooring holder. And you can have that float. It's made a big difference in navigation. And property. management. So
Okay, but the point I'm making is that the mooring holders are managing that mooring because they bought the float. They arranged to drag it out there or whatever and put it together. You just kind of said, this is where it's going to be. So when we say the private sector is now managing the moorings, that's not a whole lot different from, we got a couple of mooring holders managing their mooring. They've got a float and they've got to figure out what we're gonna do with it in the winter, et cetera,
We give them the annual right,
to be there.
the annual lease. The town, through the harbor department says, yes, you may have your mooring there. You may have your mooring there. You may put your boat on it, providing it.
I think you guys are right. We're gonna give it a shot, and see what happens.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little too far into the weeds. We started with the seasonal rentals and then started elaborating
went-
on what ifs. And, you know, would someone be interested in having it year over year? Well, to me, that's not up to us to decide. You offer the mooring to the next person on the list. It's up to them to figure out if it's too risky for them to take it.
Right.
And
Or too
we don't-
expensive.
why do we need to
Right,
get?
we don't
involved
need to get
on
in the
that?
middle of that.
So I like keeping it simple, offer it up. They say yes, they say no, that's it.
Yeah, and if next year we see a problem we need to address, we'll
Yeah.
do it then.
Okay.
Sorry, beat that
I
one to
think
death.
there's some more language that needs to go in here to make sure that it is the harbor master. So, and I think that's beyond what I want to see. Edited online.
So beyond, the harbor master will verify that all recipients of the seasonal mooring are on the wait list for a permanent mooring, were offered in appropriate order per the wait list. What else should it say?
I think I heard Ann say that we want the harbor master to do the offering as opposed to you doing the verifying. You will offer,
All right,
you know, so you're initiating. Is that fair to say?
You're referring the names, I think, referring the names to the boatyard. Yeah.
I'm not, I don't want to dictate to Brian how the
Right.
process works, other than it should be initiated from his office.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, the harbor master will manage the assignments
That's a
in
little
such a
vague
way that,
language.
Let's,
But for the
We
good
don't- we don't
language,
need to
but
edit
you
it
get the
line.
meaning.
put it on the agenda for next
that's fine.
meeting, to go
No
over
worries,
this
that's right
paragraph. But first, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak? Mr. Stark.
Jim Stark, 813 Tux Point Road. Just about every town, city on the coast has had a mooring scandal. We had our own between about 2000 or 2007, when we found that no boats were taken off the mooring list, but the number of moorings in the harbor can go down. The reason for this is that the demand for moorings is a great deal greater than the supply of moorings. State requires that moorings be assigned in a fair and equitable way from a waiting list. You've all heard this. The problem is that if you could sell moorings like real property, moorings in Manchester Harbor would easily go between $100,000 and $200,000. But a mooring permit in Manchester, only costs $200 or $300 depending on the boat. And there is a huge disconnect here. And this leads to a lot of creativity about how to monetize that difference. Now, what we're really talking about today is giving boatyards license to rent harbor bottom, which belongs to the people, to rent to the people, whoever the market will bear. We're giving them license to rent harbor bottom that does not belong to them, but belongs to the people, to rent out to people for what the market will bear. Now, let me just briefly go through how we got here. The mooring regulations that were in effect from, by the time I got involved in the harbor from 1980 to 2011, said very simply, mooring permits will be issued only for boats habitually moored or docked in Manchester. There was no such thing as boatyard moorings. The boatyards all had work boats, and those work boats legitimately have moorings because they were habitually moored here. But there was no such thing as a boatyard or a service mooring. What happened when McKeel became harbor master is he started giving boatyards moorings under the table. He gave Manchester Marine a dozen. There was no record of them. They didn't have mooring permits. They were just allowed to do it. And they were completely off the record. When Bayern came in, he couldn't find any record. Manchester Marine didn't have any record. Just no indication. These were the completely pure under the table. Don't know what the terms were, but we do know that they paid $10 per season for all of the ones that they could grab. After our mooring scandal and after town meeting passed the mooring bylaw, the harbor committee recodified the bylaws. And at the time, they recognized that the boatyards, in fact, had been using moorings, and that they made an argument that they needed a service mooring for putting boats that were waiting for parts, or boats that were waiting to be pulled, or waiting for boats to be conditioned, and whatever. And so what the harbor committee put.
I'm going to let Mr. Starkey speak until,
I'm not interrupting.
I'm
Not interrupting.
no, Mr. Bion has his hand up. I did not thought he wanted to interrupt. I told him that I didn't want him to interrupt. Please continue.
Okay. Where was I? Yes. So we had under the cover moorings. We made provision when the regulations were recodified for service moorings. And they put in there explicitly that under no condition or exception shall a permitted yard mooring be rented, leased, or loaned to a vessel for permanent use, meaning for the season. And those were the rules in effect through 2011. There were two reasons that the harbor committee put that into the regulations. One was that the state specified how moorings had to be assigned, which is off of a waiting list, which has to be completely transparent. And we believe that one tier was perfectly fine, that served our needs and served the people who use our harbors best. The second was, and this one is absolutely critically important, that there was absolutely no check whatsoever on how many moorings the harbor master could give to a boatyard. There's no check whatsoever. He's harbor master, he can give them out. They don't have to go through the waiting list. And you say, why would harbor master issue additional boatyard moorings? Well, let me give you some historical examples. First, Chief McKeel allowed unlimited under the table moorings.
Mr. Starkey, just a warning, you are now at 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Please. Move on.
All right, I cannot finish my argument in 15 seconds, I'm sorry.
Please just move along.
Okay. Secondly, when Bion discovered that the boatyards thought they had moorings, which were under the table, he made them above the table and gave them service moorings. So that's where that came from. Why did they need a dozen? Who knows? And then we allowed the boatyards to double up on their moorings. Now, as Bion pointed out, if somebody puts in a private boat, it takes 2 mooring permits. But for the boatyard moorings, it only took 1 permit. So by this funny set of rules, one for everybody else and one for the boatyards, we doubled the number of moorings that they now have. So they now have 22 mooring positions, call them berths, where they only had, and there was no way to possibly justify this as service moorings. And they were issued as service moorings. And now the argument is made that, well, they have access capacity, they don't need them for service, so we should be able to rent them out. And they're renting them out, there's no benefit for anybody except financial benefit for the boatyards. So let's just talk about this investment that Manchester Marine made. They knew when they planned their expansion that it was illegal to rent moorings. They knew that. That'd been part of the regulations forever. Second, when they installed them, they knew it was illegal to rent them. And then they rented them anyway, knowing that it was illegal. And there has to be a check here. You know, this is really bad, serious stuff. So in 2011, everybody in the harbor knew things were rotten. Everybody knew that for complete fact. When I proposed the harbor bylaw, I had endless number of people come by my office and say, it's time for somebody to do something. I'm going to vote for this. When it came up at town meeting, 200 people waited until 1:45 to pass it by a 2-to-1 vote because they knew things were rotten and the Board of Selectmen wasn't going to fix it. So that's where we are. And now you're facing the same situation. Thank you.
Okay, Bion.
So things are not rotten in Manchester Harbor right now. The original 12 moorings that Manchester Marine hold and Parker's Boatyard hold have been held by them for decades. I spoke with the previous owner of Manchester Marine. He had 12 moorings. He had 12 moorings. A gentleman who regularly attends these meetings, who was an employee before that previous owner, verified, yeah, they've always had those moorings. It wasn't in the rules and regulations. Doesn't mean they didn't have them. Nobody was telling them how to use those moorings. That previous owner told me that he rented occasionally some of those for a season. Nothing in the rules. It said he couldn't.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
the rules did quite clearly.
Not before 2011. Is that 2000? I have a copy of the 2009 Harbor Rules and Regulations where there's 0 reference to boatyard or commercial moorings.
I quote,
Sorry, Chair.
Just- We're going back and forth.
We're just relitigating something. I thought we had to come up with an answer.
Right, so
Can we solve it?
the real, as far as them getting double the moorings, yes, they did. They did. But not one person on the wait list lost a spot because there was no place to put them. No place to put them. These folks invested money in putting these bound stern moorings in that created safe navigation channels. Sorry to beat the dead horse, but we have safe navigation in a part of the harbor where we did not. And if by creating a space to put another boat that did not exist before, through this investment in making our harbor safer, I thought that's how we got to where we were instead of relitigating. So,
Okay, let's, I think the sense that I get from the board is that this is ground that's been covered. Okay. Would it be acceptable to the board to have this paragraph come back with the changes at our next meeting for approval?
That works for me.
Okay. Shall we continue? Because I think we're not through the changes.
yeah, we're getting,
Okay, just for a minor point, 742. Ms. Bell, Reed Park.
742, Mrs. Bellis.
We're up a little bit.
That's it.
Oh, yes.
If at some point you're going over this stuff and want to do a general replace of Board of Selectmen with Select Board to bring us up to modern parlance.
Absolutely. So we get down to fees. Recommended that commercial operators be launched totally on a back pay $350 for a seasonal pass instead of the $125. Park tie-up.
Which number is that?
This we're
935,
What number?
line 935.
and my strong recommendation is that you put the fees in a separate regulation so that we don't have to go over the whole of the regulations when you change the fees year by year. So you have one document that has your fees in it. And there's one fee earlier and I don't, it's $100 and I don't remember where it is. But put all of the fees in one place where they can be changed annually simply without bringing this whole document to the committee, to the board.
At the request of the select board, earlier in the year, we went to $10 an hour for the Reed Park tie-up. And then the launch service fees, the season pass $575, the ride $10 per person each way. Harbor tours, $25 for adults, children $12, under 6 are free. And then the harbor tour, not the harbor launch tour, harbor tour, 1 hour full boat, $300, up to a full boat, 2 hours, $575.
Sorry, what's the difference between the launch tour and the tour?
So if you're getting a launch tour, you are going on the launch and your ride may include stopping and picking up folks.
Oh, okay, so the harbor tour is you're getting a group together, it's more of a private.
Yeah,
Dedicated to that, no stops.
Dedicated to
Right.
that.
I
No,
like the
no
shot.
launch.
So those last 3 or 4 lines, they did not exist before. These are all just offerings. We've got to put a number here.
Right, so
That's
these
right.
are all numbers that the select board came up.
I recall the discussion, but they were not itemized before at all.
No, they didn't.
Because they were services that was, hey, we can do this, we can have a tour thing, and they were added. Okay.
Oh, no, these harbor tours, these fees were decided by the select board.
I know the fees were, but the whole entry is red, which tells me that that entry did not exist at all.
These regulations were not approved,
Okay,
so everything in red, it goes back to either the addition of the launch or any changes made after April of 2023. And that concludes
Okay, I'm back up to 902.
902.
The temporary mooring site program is when a mooring becomes available for a season and is assigned. I don't understand this fee at all, actually. And how does that work with boatyard moorings?
This just says that you have to pay your fees. You could strike everything except for use of an assigned mooring site is not permitted until all fees are paid. You could simplify
Simplifies
that.
it.
Put a strike. Get rid of it.
Okay.
The reason the temporary program is. That language was in there is because sometimes campsites don't become available until July.
Mhm.
This was directed more at regular mooring holders. You're gonna pay your fee, you want to use your mooring.
Are there any other questions from the board? Can I have a motion to approve the waterway?
Not even gonna modify the language and bring
Yeah,
it
I
back.
thought
I was going to say, modify the mooring regulation, mooring and waterway regulations with the exception of lines 677 through 684.
So moved.
Further discussion? Jeff,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Anne says yes.
Yes.
Okay, I think we have beaten this one to death.
Oh, thank you.
Not yet.
We have one more strike, but
Not yet. Ah, it's tough.
yes. Ms. Bolton, you are
Oh.
exceedingly
Yes.
patient.
Sainthood.
Had I been a more decent person, we would have moved you up in the order, but
That's okay, I learned a lot, I actually can do more in myself, so I was like, oh, this is very informational for me.
Don't try to sell
or rent it.
Well, I rent through.
Oh, okay.
Okay, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you think the Sustainability Committee would be a good place for you.
Yeah, I just, some notes if that's okay. So I thought it'd be helpful to share how I came to learn about the Sustainability Committee, why I'd like to get involved, and a few ideas I have that I'd love to pursue if I had the opportunity to join the committee. So I first learned about the committee through my friend, Annie McBride. She's currently one of the co-chairs of the Sustainability Committee. She and I both grew up together.
Thank you.
Shut the door.
You can't shut the door, but you can shut them up.
Okay.
Move them up.
Thank you.
I work here, it's done.
Please, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I learned about the committee through my friend Annie McBride, who's currently one of the co-chairs of the committee. She and I both grew up together in the same town in New Jersey, and coincidentally now both live in Manchester. So I first learned about the committee through her. Earlier this year, she invited my family to join the committee on a tour of Gravelly Pond Reservoir, and kind of came to learn about how we get our town water. Also learn more about the new compost center that was opened earlier this summer, and just had a lot of general, just very casual conversation with her because of her involvement in the committee. And she is the one who sort of encouraged me to get more involved and said that there were some openings on the committee this year, and said, why don't you apply? My why is I'm a mom of 2 younger children and an active member of the Manchester Mothers Club. I particularly would love to focus on initiatives that could involve younger families and activities that highlight easy, actionable things that any resident could do to reduce waste and conserve energy. I'm by no means a perfect example of being 100% sustainable, but I'm committed to learning and doing better, and trying to just be a good example for my kids and the local community. And finally, the few ideas that I've brainstormed in some of my conversations with her. Partner with Manchester Cricket to potentially highlight a sustainable tip of the week. Actionable stuff for local residents. Organize more educational initiatives or events similar to the Gravelly Pond Tour or visit to the compost center field. I saw that there was a oyster upweller program in Ascanoma Park. Would love to learn more about that. Just different things that could get, locals more involved and seeing things in person in the community. And one sort of thing that caught my eye was working with the suppliers over trash bags. We buy our trash bags every week here, and there's plastic and paper in every single purchase that we buy. Like, is there something we can do to even just start with easy things to reduce waste?
Thank you. Kathy. Well, I was gonna ask you about what would you like to focus on if you join the committees? You already answered that question. So no, I think you'd be great on the committee. Thank you very much for stepping up and volunteering. Right.
Becky Jakes,
Yeah,
and you'll have the time for this?
I believe so. Annie sort of mentioned to me that there's like a few monthly or bi-monthly meetings, so my husband to babysit during the evening, like tonight, and
Step up.
yeah.
I don't, just thank you for your interest in taking the time to do it.
John?
Yeah, no, and I also want to thank you. Annie did send us a note, and you're already hitting the ground running. And we especially appreciate people who have young families to be able to do this, because we know you've got to organize your life pretty well. And if you want stuff done, ask a busy person to do it, because they really know how to execute. So, thanks.
Thank you for having put together that presentation. It just makes it completely obvious why you should be doing this. Thank you.
John?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's meant. I move that the board appoint Jennifer Moulton to the Sustainability Committee for a term to expire June 30th, 2026.
Second.
John,
Yes.
Pam says yes, Kathy,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes,
and Jeff.
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hanging around.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
We gotta be here anyway.
Yeah. Okay, the consent agenda. Does anyone want to pull anything out of the consent agenda? Except for the meeting minutes, which aren't there.
Did you want to do the?
Short term.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
That's why I was sticking around.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this thing here on
I'm
the
sorry.
longer, it's not gonna be short term, this is.
Well, I don't know that I can answer a lot of questions, but I do want to give the discussion. I was wondering when we were going to get around to
I'm sorry.
fixing the old file.
Wishful thinking, Ann. Yeah.
Sorry.
So this was prompted by the new ADU law.
Right.
And a concern that without beefing up what is a pretty weak short-term rental bylaw currently, that those ADUs may not really be used for housing, for permanent housing, but more short-term rentals. And our neighbors in Gloucester, as just one example, they did a pretty major rewrite of their bylaw on short-term rentals, which puts some real limitations on what type of structure can be used for short-term rentals, and divided into different categories. So if it's a room in a house, then yeah, you can do that 365 days of the year. Just look at my cheat sheet here.
So we'll just say that Gloucester is a city,
No, I know.
but I'm just saying that they're, whatever they do would not have gone through the Attorney General's office for approval. So
Oh, okay.
the short-term rental law does allow for local bylaws that have additional restrictions, but we want to look at it from the lens of what the AG has approved.
Yeah. So, yeah, I wasn't saying that we should adopt what Gloucester has. It's just one example
Yeah.
of putting some additional guardrails on what we do. So I'm not trying to solve it tonight. We want to put in place a process to take us from now until early April at the latest to have something proposed for town meeting.
The planning board weigh in on this?
I'm not aware of their in-depth discussion. I know that certainly well, Sarah Melish has brought it up as from the ZBA perspective, expressed some concerns about not having something more in place. And, but I think that's probably a good place to start, is to have a conversation with the planning board.
I guess I read the bylaw and I read the proposed amendments. And I mean, the restriction on how many days a year you can use it is much less interesting in Manchester, I think, than it might be in Gloucester. Because people are interested here in short-term rentals between the mid-May and maybe the 1st of October. So if we tell them it's 120 days, but you can get 6 months if you live in the house, it doesn't seem like it's the right way to control it. And I guess what I'd really like to do first is decide what it is that we want to do.
Right, I would agree.
And you had laid it out as we want to avoid having the ADUs, which can be, I think, part of a house or separate, or in addition to a house.
Right.
We don't want to
Yeah,
have
we
the
don't want we want the ADUs to be for housing, for residential housing as
Correct.
opposed to
Hotels.
vacationers, right? That's, I
I
believe,
think that would be the
common
goal, that you want to limit how much those ADUs can be used for short-term rental.
Correct.
Do we
I'm
care,
making that assumption. That was my assumption going into this, that's your goal.
do we care if it's an ADU where the owner of the main house isn't resident? Does that make a difference?
In my mind, it does. When you say isn't a resident, so you,
Isn't resident. Much of the Gloucester law
Right.
has to do with how much time the owner,
right,
who may or may not be a person.
right, corporate, language around corporations, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, I think I care because from what I've been reading in the Globe about the infiltration of corporations in the housing market, it's part of the reason why there's so much pressure on the rental prices, because corporations are buying properties and then turning around and renting them either for long-term or short-term use, and that drives up the price. So I am concerned. I think there's a difference between owner occupied, owner, a seasonal owner, a seasonal resident, and, complete non-residents, whether they be corporations or whatever,
Mhm.
renting. I think there is very strong distinctions.
I forget, maybe I don't know. ADUs, can they count towards the SHI?
I believe so.
Yes.
I don't remember, but.
That's,
Because that makes a big difference there.
but, okay.
Well, if
I
they
would
can't
move-
count to the SHI, do they count towards your
Well, I'm
total
saying
amount
is
of
one
housing?
way, if we're gonna call it housing, then it's gonna be housing. We don't, if
Right, it seems like
we're gonna
it's,
put it on if we're gonna put it in the index, or into the inventory,
right,
then it should be a rental. It should be 12 months or whatever it is.
Well, that's what some
Right.
of the language that I liked in the Gloucester
Yeah.
law, saying that if it's in the affordable housing registry, you
Right.
can't rent it out, as a short-term rental.
Okay, there's that, which is sort of different than saying that if you have an ADU, you should be able to put it in the SHI.
Right. And
My understanding
I don't know.
is that the SHI is onerous enough that it would be very difficult, it'd be unlikely that anyone would voluntarily put
That's true.
one
Yeah.
ADU.
Because then it's gonna be advertised.
It's gotta, you have to hire a media
The
contract.
lottery, yes, that's true.
But it does impact
Yeah,
our overall
it's going to kill our,
SHI.
Ratio, our
It's gonna
ratio.
throw us right out of the,
Yeah.
I don't, well, not that we're in compliance now.
But it's
Not
an
gonna
additional housing unit,
Right.
and
Additional
so
units.
the denominator goes up.
10%, which is gonna be 10%.
So I guess my general feedback was, I think providing us with the Gloucester document was a great way to get the conversation started so that we can think about all the different things we need to think about. I like what Ann is saying, though, let's make sure we're clear on, at a high level, what's our strategy? What do we want and not want? And then we can, our attorneys can help us
Mhm.
And I
with the
will say-
simplest document possible to make that
We did a
happen.
lot of these down on the Cape.
Yeah.
Recently, Provincetown,
Okay.
Eastham, I think in Nantucket, I mean,
Is there a simpler version of the Gloucester?
yeah, I mean, it's,
Listen.
to some point, you gotta figure out what you wanna do.
Right.
There's a lot of parameters that you folks can decide upon, and we can, and I was just looking at, when I saw that this is on the agenda, I was looking at, we have a variety of sort of memos on the different options. But I know that the Cape Towns in particular, and I bet, I would be surprised if Rockport hasn't been working on it too as well, but we went through this last spring. And one of the big things that has been pretty divisive is whether you're going to limit corporations from,
Mhm.
having it had the owner, it can't be the corporation that come in and buy the property solely for the purpose of.
Yeah, that's something I'm very concerned about.
So I can certainly provide Greg with examples of ones that we've worked on with other communities and what they, that.
That would be helpful.
That's a different idea.
I think this is going to be a big project. And it needs to be done quickly. And I think expecting either the planning board or the select board, or even the two of us working together, which is even slower. To take
The
it.
task force got nothing to know.
I hope it's another task force, but yeah,
And I wish that Jonathan didn't have another meeting. He had to go for one at 7:30 because I would have had him stay because he could have probably talked about what ones that he's worked on with some of our communities.
but unfortunately, it's too late to put have the planning board talk about this at their next, they're a
No.
week from now.
A week from tonight,
Okay.
you can see what's else on the agenda.
But I think it would be a good idea for the select board and planning board to come up with a task force of some sort that can focus on this
Quick
So-
turnaround.
for, well, yeah, 18 months was not exactly right.
I think we can keep the circle small. I mean,
We can,
tighten
yeah,
that up.
Yeah, I don't get the sense, I mean,
It should
Three
be.
person.
they're of high interest in the communities that are, that I've been to their town meetings adopting, but I don't think it took the same amount of bandwidth as the.
Right, but I think it's
So-
important that both this committee and the planning board, if we know some things that we would like to see in the end result, we clarify those boundaries, and hopefully that would make the process go faster.
This has, and that this has an endpoint of our meeting in April.
Absolutely, we're on a
It's not
deadline.
gonna run a year and a half.
And it's even beforehand too, right?
Right.
Because we have to do all.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, your
our
objective here
checklist
was,
Of all the people that have to review the different.
But-
pieces and
To be ready by the end of April, you really need to be done.
Done by
the 1st of
March.
April.
yeah, by the end of March. But are you looking for something temporarily between now and then, or
No,
this is just to get something that can go in front of the town,
Yeah.
go on the town meeting warrant?
Yes.
Fine.
So maybe talk to the planning board about putting together a group of 6 people or.
Five.
that's too many.
Five.
I would say three.
Yeah,
Okay,
honestly, I agree.
I can
Three.
think of, Marty, I think I would ask Sarah.
yeah.
I can't imagine someone
As
much.
I said, you get
Sarah.
a ZBA member, a planning board member, and a select board member.
Right, I
and-
think, and that's it. That was the way I would go. I think that there's no one better suited to speak to the ADU than Sarah.
Well, she went through the wars with that.
Okay, yeah, this is confusing.
Yes.
You know who you're talking
You
about.
know, I mean, I've worked beside her for the last
Yeah.
4 or 5 years, and as far as
Okay.
knowing her zoning and understanding what we're trying to accomplish, like, it's Sarah, and someone here.
Okay,
So could we ask the planning board to agree? To set up something? At their meeting?
And I can get you some examples.
Yeah,
Hmm.
with the
Oh.
hands and,
yeah, I
just-
mean, it's, the more examples, the better.
And I was trying to find it, rather, of course, with technology, but I was just trying to find the ADU bylaw, because as I was quickly looking it up, one version did have a limit, like you couldn't rent, it wouldn't be eligible to be a short-term rental as it's defined, so.
Oh,
I would
in the state law.
The housing bill that just passed,
The AD, no.
that was part of,
your-
I thought,
Oh,
From 2
current.
years ago,
current one. Oh, yeah.
No, didn't.
We never passed
we,
anything.
we,
I was-
we didn't, we didn't pass
We didn't
anything.
pass anything.
And I found a draft of one that was
No, we-
updated, so I
Oh,
must
but
have.
that
didn't
that
pass
didn't go.
anything.
Didn't go anywhere.
That was
Well,
2 years
that
ago.
version would not have allowed the ADUs to
Yes,
comply with.
yes.
I think one of the questions I have though was just around the definition of a short-term rental.
31
Why-
to us.
So is that a state
That's
definition
state
that we must?
definition, but I believe you can, at least as I was
Do
reading.
90 days or
quickly.
less, you know, what is the,
Well, that's the state definition of 31 days or less, and that's meant to, so a short-term rental is not a month, like a monthly lease type of
Right.
thing.
Okay.
So if I recall your current bylaw, you know, it's a shorter period of time.
no, I know, I'm
So-
wondering where the 30 days came from and
31
what are
days.
our options for,
And that's what I'm saying, I have to look and
Different,
see
okay.
how much narrower you can do it.
Okay.
I think you can do it, more
I would
narrowly,
be
you can
interested in like
impose
90 days.
the
or
number. I don't know if you could do it,
more than the 30.
because then that starts to impede upon. You can limit the total number of days in a year.
Okay, but not
Right.
consecutive.
You can limit the number of, if I'm recalling correctly, the number of sort of certifications,
Okay.
right? So there are things that you can do locally.
So that's
to
what we'll need.
deviate
We'll
from-
need to understand the levers that we can adjust
Right.
to achieve the desired result.
And that's what I think would be helpful for you to have
Okay.
before you start to have substantive discussions of what it is you would like to see, is to know where those boundaries are.
Yeah, we need some parameters
Yeah.
to look at.
And, you know, I was looking at we have some stuff on our website, but that goes back to 2019 when the law was passed. And so I think that, meaning just the summaries of the law and that sort of thing. But I think that the experience we've had with actually working through those bylaws with some of the communities and seeing what the Attorney General has approved, that actually will probably be a little more meaningful in terms of providing these parameters. That's why I stuck around, because I wanted to.
Thank
Yeah.
It's useful for me to know that that's on the table now, because I can marshal our folks to be prepared, you know, to help you with that, rather than sort of. With any bylaw, whether it's general zoning, I always like to know as soon as we can that it's on the horizon, because it's easier for us. Not to interject us when you don't need us, but it's better to have that input early on than to have you folks go through a long process of development, something, only to have the lawyers say, well.
It's not gonna work.
The communities down in the Cape, and they're very sensitive to the seasonal rental situation, which is why they all needed some answers. And we're not like the Cape, but we're not your typical suburban west of Boston either.
Well, we may not want to
We
do
have-
like the Cape.
Yes,
So we're somewhere in the middle, and I'm really kind of torn to figure out.
Community though, I mean, I think that you
Yeah.
can probably have a seasonal influx.
Oh,
of
we do
tourists.
have some seasonal pressure, there's no question. So I'm curious, is there a big difference between what the communities that are landlocked as opposed to communities that are on the water?
And Greg may have a sense of this, given his, you know,
Berkshire.
Berkshires, I'm sure that they've got the same thing, I just don't tend to.
Yeah, they may,
work with
you're
it.
right, I take that back, seasonal, recreational
You know,
destinations.
leaf peepers, you know, there's a number of areas where it's gonna be of particular interest, but they may have some slightly different, you know,
Okay, well, just
nuances.
curious. Differences.
But there are differences. Different
And there must be.
Yeah.
You're as opposed to say Sudbury.
Right.
Something like that.
Okay, so we'll do some homework. We'll,
get some information, get it on the planning board's attention. Nice to get this started. By the first of the year.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, at least.
And so what I've heard so far tonight is that we're we want the ADUs that are now allowed to be used for housing. We don't want commercial ownership of short-term rentals. We prefer not to sink the SHI if we can avoid it.
Right. Unavoidable.
Um,
But again, I think that, I know maybe there'll be I don't know if there's gonna be a big rush for ADUs in town. We really didn't see an awful lot in the last.
No, but if we don't have any language.
Right, I'm just saying is that if we, now we have some language. But I think we're gonna, if we get 3 or 4 a year, maybe. I think a lot.
My concern is the commercial piece. We don't have any language to protect ourselves right now. Do you want to put on, if we talked about just having a task force of the 3 people, does someone here want to volunteer to be the select board rep?
yeah, I would.
Go from one task force to the other. There you go. Perfect. That way we can just keep this moving and the request to the
You wanna do
planning
that with the
board.
School committee interface coming up.
I don't think this is gonna be an awful lot of work.
I don't think it's.
No, it's not.
I think I can manage.
Good.
So then the request of the planning board is to assign someone to this task force.
Right.
And then the other action is to ask Sarah if she would be willing to serve, and then they get started. Right.
Oh crap.
It's December, the clock is ticking.
Okay, having,
Basically, what we've done is you created the task force this now.
I did.
right. Oh, good. Liaison reports are on this. How nice. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, folks. Good to see you all. I will get that stuff over to Greg, tomorrow, quite frankly, just as a starting point. See what the different, different communities have done. Look forward to talking more about it, although maybe you'll see John. That's more his gig than mine. All right, thank you, folks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
Take your coat.
We're just saying, it's too cold.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
need that.
You'll-
You know,
No,
I'm gonna get outside.
Be back.
Consent agenda?
Consent agenda, I will take out the meeting minutes.
I move that the select board approve the consent agenda minus the November 4th, 2024 meeting minutes.
Second,
Discussion. John,
yes.
answers yes, Kathy,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and Jeff.
Yes.
Thank you.
So quick update on construction, we worked on Pleasant Street with the water main there is wrapped up for the season. Obviously, there still needs to be an overlay of the road. There's a new asphalt that'll be done come spring. The trenches are covered, but we'll get a smooth overlay come springtime there. And the water work on Forest and Mill has also wrapped up with the cold setting in. Ran into some challenges, mainly a gas line that was sitting on top of our water line, which was not marked or on the plans, but there it was. And so that slowed us down. We are in discussions with National Grid to get some relief for the extra time and money that has cost us. So stay tuned on that. nonetheless, they got most of it in. There's 3 homes that they were not able to complete. If we get a break in the cold weather, for a week and a half or so, they could come in and complete that work. If not, it'll have to wait till spring. Meanwhile, they're able to keep going on the shoreline, installing the new shoreline. And that work will go through the cold weather. So overall, doing pretty well, despite some of the extra challenges that are there. As part of the action items, we were going to give a more detailed update on the DPW facility exploration, but felt better to wait to get a little more information in order to present to you some more details on the possibilities, including looking at fitting just conceptually where the public safety complex could fit there as well. Some preliminary, kicking of the dirt would indicate that there is that possibility. And so we wanted to get more information on that and then bring that before you as well. So that's a stay tuned. But we're doing that geotechnical work now and should have some good information for you by the first of the year. So we'll revisit that. You're familiar, I think, with the lead survey work that had to be done, required by EPA. As part of that, part of those mandates from EPA, needing to send letters to folks who have known lead in existence, and also letters to people who we don't know whether or not they have lead. And so those letters have all gone out. We put some additional materials out. There's Chuck had a letter to the editor week before, Cricket, explaining what this all means and what the work has to be done. As part of our meter replacement process, we'll be certainly able to confirm for certain every household whether or not they have a lead service pipe. So if people aren't able to determine on their own, we will get that information over the next year and a half. The good news for folks is that we continue to do the testing that we have always done. We've always taken samples from houses with known lead service lines as part of our sampling. And even those samples have always come in below the thresholds. We do add an inhibitor to the water to prevent any leaching out of lead from the pipes. So even though this is heightened in terms of awareness and information from EPA, we still remain confident that people are drinking water that is safe for them. But the goal is to remove all the lead pipe, and we have a 10-year window to do that. Should be sooner than that, but we have up to 10 years. Chipping away at trying to get the final permits in place for the Central Street culvert. We're getting we're getting close, but we're not quite there.
What's the drop dead date for getting these sign-offs, if you will, before it causes a delay?
I would say if we don't have them by the end of January. That's
And are the people who we need to get the sign-offs from, are they aware of that deadline, that they would cause an incredible expensive delay to the town?
we're reinforcing that, but yes.
So we've given them a deadline. Okay. End of January.
So we will continue to reinforce that as well. And then finally, not on my list here, but there's been some interest in getting the artificial ice rink back up and running. And I think there was some talk perhaps at the last chamber meeting. I was able to attend that. So we're looking at a late winter timeframe, maybe end of February into March timeframe. So Park and Rec, we're reaching out to some members of the chamber and business community and start pulling together some possibilities.
Okay, that was just asked about that over the weekend. Whatever happened to that thing?
We kind of forgot about it last year, but we remembered it
Well,
for
I
this
think
coming year.
the other issue, it's a pain in the ass. Set up.
it takes time to set up. It's not something that goes down, in an hour. It's a day-long process to set it up. It does take, vigilance to monitor and maintain it daily. So on a daily basis, you need to, you need to sweep it, you need to apply some, lubricant, for lack of a better term, to try to fill in some of
We
the
put it inside community stuff.
inside.
Yeah.
The whole point is to be out by the water, it's pretty,
Sitting inside,
cold.
I just, ancillary, I had a discussion with Mr. Lemire again. today.
Hadn't thought of that, but
There's a difference between playing hockey in an indoor rink and playing hockey in Fenway Park. I'll just say that. It's the ambiance, it's outdoors. It's part of the
Oh.
experience.
So it
But I-
does,
you
it
know,
does
But it's a
take,
flat surface
It is a
inside.
flat surface,
inside. And again, I just bring this up only because I was, basically it's ours if we want.
inside.
The community center is ours if we want.
Oh.
So we can discuss that, maybe put that on, something discussed later on or something like that.
Action item.
As an action item.
So, yeah, the challenge is getting staffing or volunteers. There needs to be some oversight on a daily basis if it's in use. So that becomes a bit of a challenge.
Mhm.
So, like I said, Park and Rec is working on it, reaching out to the business community and see what might be possible.
For Christmas.
Oh, yeah,
That
so
defeats
what
the
brought this
purpose,
up
yeah.
was Lisa Bartlett said, I would set that up in her driveway. For Christmas by the Sea. Maybe next year.
Oh, that's what I have.
Close. Oh,
Are you gonna?
a lot of signatures.
She's got a lot to sign.
Look to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
I.
Aye.
All right, thank you.